Hello there, it's Deborah Irene coming to you today with story time and stories and lessons from my mother, Helen Herbert Gillum. About a week ago, I told you that I was going to read to you the chapters at the back of her book, Helen's Heritage, that talked about her siblings and her family. And so last week we read the chapter about her father, my grandfather, James Bernard Herbert. And today we are going to read the chapter about her mother, Rhoda Margaret Case Herbert. Let me just reiterate a little bit about the back of this book. Helen's Heritage is my mother's life story, passed away last September, so I've been honoring her with stories and lessons from her book and also some from my other two books, Reflections and Someday I Will Write, because there are lessons in those two books as well as her book, Helen's Heritage, from her. At the back of her book, after she told her story in chronological order, we have a section called The Clan. And this is devoted a little chapter to her 15 siblings, herself, and her mother and her father. I mentioned that we have a family tree in this section as well. So today we're going to read about her mother, my grandmother, Rhoda Margaret Case Herbert. And I want to remind you this is speaking in my mother's voice, and that she was the youngest of 16 children. So her parents were born in the 1800s. You have to kind of keep that in mind. So Rhoda Margaret Case Herbert, and she was also known as Maggie or Mag, was born on March 21, 1888 in Greene County, Missouri, to Jefferson Davis Case and Leona Tennessee Slagle. There were 10 children in her family, 8 from this marriage and 2 from an earlier marriage. The children in her family, in my grandmother's family or my mother's family, the first 2 were boys from a previous marriage, John Melvin and William Marvin. Then Lula, Lucy Kendrick, Rhoda Margaret, my grandmother, my mother's mother, or Maggie, Roseanne, Emma, Nell, Nora Bell, and Ora Jane, who were twins, Nora and Ora, and their nicknames were Node and Jim, respectively, and those were the names that we called them by. And then the youngest, a boy, Benjamin Franklin, known as Ben. So here are some pictures of my grandmother's family. Over here, you will see a picture of her and her sister Lucy back at the turn of the century. This is my grandmother, Rhoda Margaret, my mother's mother, towards the last decade of her life, the end of her life. And then look at this awesome picture where all of her family, they're all dressed up for an event. Now I'm told this was one of the sisters' weddings. I believe Aunt Lucy's wedding is what I found out after we published this book. And this picture, which I really enjoy, was taken in 1910. So Leona, Tennessee, and that would have been my grandmother's mother, my mother's grandmother. Boy, it's hard to keep this large family straight. Leona, Tennessee was known as 10, was first married for to Mr. John Cross, who was killed in a train accident. The two older boys, Melvin and Marvin, assumed the Case name after Leona and Jefferson were married. The Case family lived in a 3-room log cabin near Stratford, Missouri, before moving to Polk County, Missouri. So this picture was taken in about 1888, and it's missing one of the children, Lula, and then, of course, Ben, who was not born yet. And look at this log cabin. Oh, my goodness. Isn't that something? That was the log cabin that they lived in near Stratford, Missouri. Jefferson Davis was born in England and came to the United States with his parents when he was 6 years old. As an adult, he ran thresher crews and was a surveyor. James Bernard Herbert worked for him. That's how Rhoda Margaret, my mother's mother, met him. Mama, Maggie, and Dad, Bernard, had been married 31 years when she left him in 1935. I'm sure she had no idea the difficulties that she would face, losing custody of the younger children and trying to make a new life while being estranged from her children, her brothers, and sisters. Now, I want to reiterate here that the details about that breakup are in her book in the earlier chapters, but we didn't go into those details here. I know that Dad loved Mama, but I think he had a hard time showing that love. When in Missouri, she raised her family, worked in the fields like a man, and went to church. She was finally able to build a new life in the 1940s when she moved to California. She had more opportunities there and was well respected by family, friends, and employers. Dad used to say, "She'll be back," but she never returned under his control. And I don't believe she ever regretted leaving him. She married Mr. Taft in 1947 in Reno, Nevada. Unfortunately, he died within their first year of marriage. Eventually, after several years, Mama and Dad were cordial with one another when she returned to Missouri on visits. One time when Mama visited us, when I was about 11, I confided that I would be glad when Poppy died so I could go live with her in California. Well, she scolded me for that. Then years later, after I had moved to California to live with her, on one of our visits to Missouri, Dad had severe eye problems. She bought him a new package of white handkerchiefs to wipe his eyes because she didn't want him to use his dirty blue ones. I remember another time when we were just chit-chatting about our years apart. I talked about the times she sent us packages back to Missouri and how much I loved that. I mentioned that the heavy coat she sent one time went to some distant relatives in Alaska. She looked surprised and said, "I thought your dad could use those since he worked outside all of the time." Yes, my mama had a good heart. And we have a couple of pictures here that shows, not on this side, over here, of times they did have pictures taken together later on, after there was some forgiveness there. Mama died on May 4, 1959, just 6 weeks after she moved back to Missouri. She agreed to be buried at the cemetery in Bolivar, next to where Dad would be buried. Both of them were okay with that. I think that reflects sincere forgiveness all the way around. So if you want to know more about the details, you're going to have to read the beginning part of Helen's Heritage. So we just read about my mother's mother, Rhoda Margaret, my grandmother. I also mention her. I have a vignette chapter in my book Reflections about her that I call Mammy because that's what I called her when I was a little toddler. I do remember her. I was only 3 years old when she passed away, but I do have memories of her in California. Then also in my book, Someday I Will Write, I wrote a chapter and I called it Misunderstood Maggie. She left us too soon. I wish we could have had her around many more years. She only lived to be about 72, whereas Grandpa lived to be 97. But everybody dearly, dearly loved her. I hope you had a mother, and I hope you have a mother and you had a grandmother like the one that I had. This is Deborah Irene with Storytime, and a story from my mother's book, Helen's Heritage, about her mother, Rhoda Margaret.